A child was killed, not by criminals but by the system meant to protect him. The sheriff shook hands with evil. The court looked away, and the town called it peace. Don't scroll. This is the story they've buried for 100 years. And it's time you knew. When Samuel Carter stepped off the train in Macon, Georgia, the red dirt clung to his boots, like it remembered him, like the land itself hadn't moved an inch since the day he left. He wore the same jacket he had in the trenches of France, though the brass buttons had dulled, and the fabric had faded to a tired gray. The war was behind him, but he could already feel another kind of battle in the air, one where the enemy didn't wear uniforms or wave flags. The platform was quiet, too quiet. No welcome home, no familiar voices calling his name, just the hiss of the steam engine and a few white men watching him like he didn't belong, even though he'd risked his life for their flag. 3 years ago, he was Private Carter of the 369th Infantry Harlem Hellfighters, they called them. He remembered the gunfire, the mustard gas, the blood-soaked mud. And he remembered saving Corporal Clark, a white boy from Illinois, who'd screamed for help when the shell hit. Samuel had dragged him back through no man's land, while bullets sang past his ears. Clark didn't say thank you. He just stared at Samuel like he couldn't believe someone like him could be brave. And now, back in Georgia, Samuel wondered what had changed him, or this place. Main Street hadn't aged. Same brick buildings, same creaky general store, same courthouse with that big white columned face pretending justice lived there. But the signs had changed. Coloreds around back, whites only. New paint, same poison. Rachel had written in her last letter, "It's quieter here now, but not safer." He didn't understand then. He did now. He walked past the town square, his war medals clinking faintly against his chest, and saw a group of men laughing outside the diner. One of them pointed at him and muttered, "Ain't no uniform gonna make him a man." The others chuckled. Samuel kept walking. He'd heard worse, but it still stung like a fresh wound. When he reached their house, a small wooden home with chipped paint and the sweet smell of magnolia blooming in the yard, Rachel was already at the door. She looked exactly like he remembered. Strong, sharp-eyed, hands dusted with flour. But there was something else now. A weight in her gaze. A quiet fear she tried to bury beneath her smile. They embraced without words. The kind of hug that says, "You made it home, and please don't leave again." Over dinner, she told him about the night riders, about the crosses burned on Reverend Hill's lawn, about Thomas Bell, the boy from down the road, who'd been dragged out of his house last fall. No trial, no explanation, just gone. And how Sheriff Jennings had shown up the next day saying, "Must have skipped town." Samuel's jaw tightened. He'd seen horror on the battlefield. But this was something else. This was horror with a handshake, with a badge, with a Bible. Later that night, as Rachel slept, Samuel sat alone on the porch, staring out into the darkness. He took off his metal silver, circular, engraved with the words "For bravery in the field." He held it in his palm, then looked up at the full moon rising behind the trees. Back in France, men had died so that metal could mean something. Here, it didn't mean a damn thing. Down the road, an engine started. A pair of headlights flared in the distance, then vanished behind the trees. Samuel felt a chill crawl up his spine. The war had followed him home. It just wore a different uniform now. And this time, it didn't fight fair. The next morning, the sun spilled over Macon's sleepy streets, like nothing had ever gone wrong here. But Samuel knew better. Rachel had gone to teach at the colored school just 2 blocks away, and he had a list of errands that should have been simple: renew his license, pick up a few supplies for the house, check on the paperwork for reopening his father's old food stand. He hadn't planned on seeing what he saw. It was at the courthouse, the same place that had once held mock trials for black folks accused of breathing too loud near white women. Samuel walked up the steps, nodding stiffly at the white receptionist, who barely looked up from her nail file. "I'm here for business permit information," he said. She blinked, slow and unimpressed. "Someone will be with you shortly." Samuel nodded and stepped aside, standing near the hallway that led toward the back chambers of the courthouse, where judges and lawmen gathered when they didn't want the public to hear what they were saying. He wasn't eavesdropping, not at first, but voices rose behind the door at the far end, a gruff laugh, the sound of boots against polished floor. Then, words he would never forget. The boy's trial won't matter. We'll make sure it ends the way it's supposed to. The voice was low but clear. Another voice responded sharp, smug, tinged with amusement. You know we trust you, Sheriff. Georgia's safe, in the hands of men like you. Samuel shifted closer, just enough to peek through the crack of the door that hadn't fully closed. And there it was, Sheriff M. Jennings, uniform crisp and clean, was shaking hands with a man whose face was obscured by shadow but whose ring shone unmistakably. A silver circle engraved with the 3 burning crosses of the Ku Klux Klan. The handshake didn't last long, but the silence that followed felt like thunder in Samuel's ears. He backed away quietly, careful not to let the floorboards creak. His heart pounded like it had in the trenches. Only this time, he had no rifle, no comrades, just the truth and the terrible knowledge that the sheriff of Macon County was working with the Klan. He left the courthouse without a word. No paperwork, no license, just a sour taste in his mouth and a fire building in his chest. Outside, the town looked the same. Farmers loading sacks into carts, housewives chatting under the shade of church awnings. But Samuel saw it all differently now, like the entire town was a stage, and behind the curtain, evil men in white robes were pulling the strings. That night, at home, he told Rachel. She stirred her tea twice before speaking. Are you sure? He nodded. I saw it. I saw the ring. I saw them shaking hands like they were discussing weather. Rachel exhaled slowly. Jennings was always polite to me, always asked about my students. That's the trick, Samuel said. He wears the badge by day, the hood by night. For a long moment, they sat in silence, the only sound the creak of the old rocking chair on their porch. Rachel finally said, I want to believe the law still means something, Sam. I want to believe that if someone's guilty, they face a fair trial. But if the men running the system are the ones lighting the torches, then what does any of it mean? Samuel stared out toward the street, where the sheriff's car had passed earlier that evening. It means we're on our own, he said quietly. The next day, the tension in town rippled like heat waves off asphalt. A rumor had begun to circulate, something about a black boy and a white girl. No names yet, just whispers. At the barbershop on Jefferson Street, Samuel sat in the corner chair while Mr. Avery trimmed the edges of another man's hair. You hear what they're saying? Avery asked, keeping his voice low. Sheriff's got it out for a colored boy. Say he touched a white girl in the market. Whole thing stinks. Another man chimed in, don't matter if it's true. Once the word's out, it's done. Samuel stayed quiet, chewing on the inside of his cheek. He already knew who the boy was. He didn't know his name yet, but he could feel it coming like a storm no one wanted to name. On his walk home, he passed by the town square again. There, nailed to the old oak tree, was a new flyer. Citizens for Decency Rally. This Sunday at dusk. Let's take our town back. And beneath it, the seal of the sheriff's department. It wasn't subtle. It wasn't even coded. It was public, proud, and dressed up like patriotism. Samuel ripped the flyer down and folded it into his pocket. That night, he sat with Rachel again, going over every detail he'd seen, every word he'd heard. You think people will believe you? She asked. No, he answered. But they'll believe what happens next, and they'll remember we tried to stop it. Rachel touched his hand. We have to be careful. Samuel looked her in the eye, his voice steady. I didn't survive bullets in France to be hunted by ghosts in my own backyard. If they want to wear hoods, fine, but I'll walk in daylight, and I won't flinch. A car passed by the house, slowing just a little before it turned the corner. Rachel closed the curtains, and somewhere in the night, a dog barked once, then went silent. The war had returned, but this time it spoke English, and it wore a sheriff's badge. The scream shattered the still morning like a stone through glass. Samuel had just stepped off the porch, coffee in hand, when it echoed down the street from the direction of Lincoln Elementary. He froze. For a second, everything was still. Then came the rush footsteps, shouts, the sickening sound of panic rippling across the neighborhood. He ran. By the time he reached the schoolyard, a crowd had gathered, mostly children with wide, terrified eyes, and teachers too afraid to speak. 2 white deputies were dragging a boy, barely a teenager, out the front door of the building. His book spilled across the steps. His backpack tore at the seam. His voice cracked as he shouted, "I didn't do nothing. I swear to God, I didn't touch nobody." It was Thomas Bell. Samuel recognized him from church. Quiet, lanky. Always sat in the back pew with his mother. Just 14. "What's going on here?" Samuel asked, breathless, stepping toward the officers. One deputy shoved him back with a forearm. "Back off." The other smirked. "We got ourselves a real monster. Says he laid hands on a white girl at the market." A gasp swept through the teachers. "That's not true," a girl shouted from behind them. "He was in class all morning. I saw him. Didn't ask you, little miss," the deputy snapped. Rachel was there now, pushing through the crowd. "What white girl? Who made the accusation?" The deputies didn't answer. They threw Thomas into the back of the sheriff's car like a sack of potatoes. The boy's face was streaked with tears, but he didn't scream anymore. He just looked out the window at the people frozen on the sidewalk, some in shock, others already believing. The door slammed, the car pulled away, and just like that, Thomas Bell was no longer a child. He was a story waiting to be rewritten by men with badges and robes. That afternoon, the town turned electric with whispers. Samuel sat in the barber shop listening. The headline on the front page of the Macon Daily Courier read, "Negro boy assaults young white girl in broad daylight. Sheriff moves swiftly. No evidence. No witnesses. Just words, bold and violent." Avery put the paper down slowly. "They're gonna lynch that boy before Sunday." Samuel didn't respond. He was already thinking 2 steps ahead. He left the barber shop, walked straight to the courthouse. Rachel joined him, her face pale but burning with purpose. "We need to know who the girl is, if there's even a girl," she said. Inside, they met the same secretary from before. She looked up, uninterested. "We're here about Thomas Bell's case," Rachel said firmly. "You'll have to speak to the sheriff," the woman replied, tapping her nails on the desk. "We'll wait," Samuel said. But they never got to see Jennings. The door stayed shut. A clerk appeared 15 minutes later and handed them a single sheet of paper. "Case pending. Preliminary hearing in 48 hours. Rachel read the details. No official statement, no signed complaint. The accuser's name had been withheld for hair protection. It was a script, a polished one they'd used before. That night, Rachel made a list of students who'd been in class with Thomas that morning. She went door to door, speaking with mothers and children. Most were too scared to talk. But one girl, Emily Lee, just 11, spoke up. "I saw him in homeroom," she whispered. "We were reading. He never left. Not even to go to the bathroom." Rachel nodded. "Would you be willing to say that in court?" Emily bit her lip. "My mama says I shouldn't get involved." Rachel placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Sometimes getting involved is the only way to make something right." The next day, posters appeared around town. "The people demand justice for our daughters. Protect Macon's future. Stop the monsters among us." Samuel tore one down and brought it home. Rachel looked at it, then sat in silence for a long time. "He's just a boy," she finally said. "They don't see that," Samuel replied. "They see skin and a story they want to tell." Later that evening, they heard news from a cousin who worked at the courthouse. They're skipping trial, calling it a special hearing. No jury, just the judge and the sheriff. Fast-track sentencing. Rachel's hands trembled. "They're going to kill him." Samuel said nothing, but the look in his eyes was the same one he had the night before deployment. Sunday came too fast. The courthouse was ringed with people. Some carried signs. Some carried rifles. Some wore smiles that didn't belong on a Sunday morning. Inside, the Judge Willis Crowley looked like a statue carved from ice. Sheriff Jennings stood at his side like a shadow. Thomas sat in the defendant's chair, his arms shackled, eyes hollow. There was no lawyer next to him, no family, just silence. Rachel tried to speak. She stood, holding Emily's written statement. "I have testimony proof that..." "Order," the judge thundered. "This is not a trial. It's a hearing, and this court has determined the facts to be sufficient." Samuel stepped forward. "You've determined nothing. This is murder dressed in paperwork." The judge's gavel slammed down. "Remove them." And just like that, they were forced out. Through the courtroom windows, they saw it. Thomas being led out the back door, A truck idling nearby, the ropes already prepared. Rachel turned away. Samuel didn't. And somewhere in the distance, as the sun dipped behind the steeple, a bell rang out once. Then silence. The town exhaled. The story had ended. But for Samuel and Rachel, it had only just begun. It was Monday morning, and the sun had no business shining. The town moved on like it always did. Church bells chimed. Storefronts opened. White children skipped to school with ribbons in their hair. But in the colored part of Macon, a fog hung thick, not in the air, but in the hearts of those who had witnessed something they couldn't unsee, something they couldn't undo. Thomas Bell was gone. No grave, no obituary, no justice, just silence. And silence is what the Klan counted on. But Rachel Carter was never good at being silent. She sat at the kitchen table with Samuel, flipping through her notebook. Her eyes were tired, but sharp. The kind of sharp that only came after loss. The kind that cuts clean through fear. "I want to talk to Helen Morris," she said. Samuel looked up from his coffee. "The school teacher?" She was in the library that day. The same time they say it happened. She knows Thomas was there. Samuel leaned back. "You think she'll speak?" "She has a conscience," Rachel said. "I've seen it in her eyes." Helen Morris lived 2 neighborhoods over, in the White District, in a narrow blue house with white shutters and flower boxes that always looked too perfect to be real. Rachel didn't bring Samuel. A black man knocking on a white woman's door could get someone lynched faster than a courtroom hearing ever would. Helen opened the door after the second knock, her face pale and stiff. "Rachel," she whispered, "you shouldn't be here." Rachel stepped closer, lowered her voice. "Please, I'm not here to make trouble. I'm here because they killed a child, and you know he was innocent." Helen hesitated. Her eyes darted toward the street. Then she opened the door wider. Inside, the house smelled of lemon polish and fresh linen. Everything was in its place. Too neat, too controlled. "I was in the library that morning," Helen said quietly, pouring tea with shaking hands. "Thomas was there. So were 3 other children. He was reading a history book. He never left the room." "Would you say that publicly?" Rachel asked. Helen froze. Her knuckles whitened on the teacup. I don't know. Would you write a statement? I'll make sure your name stays out of it." Helen looked at her for a long time, then nodded slowly. "Yes, I'll write it. But I won't sign it." "It's enough," Rachel said. "For now." She left with the paper tucked inside her dress, heart pounding. For the first time in days, she felt like there was a sliver of hope. Something solid. Something real. That night, a knock came at the door. Samuel answered, half expecting a deputy with another false charge, or worse, a group in white robes. But it was Helen. Her coat was torn, her eyes bloodshot, and her right hand was bandaged thick with gauze. Rachel rushed to her. "What happened?" "They were waiting for me outside the school," Helen whispered. 2 men. I didn't see their faces, but they didn't need to show them. She sat down, shaking. They didn't say a word, just grabbed my hand and twisted, said next time it'd be my neck. Samuel stood behind her, fists clenched. "Did you go to the police?" Helen laughed short, bitter. "The police?" One of them was wearing Jennings's badge. Rachel knelt beside her. "You don't have to speak again. You've done enough." "No," Helen said. "They want me to be afraid. I won't give them that. Take the paper. Use it. Just leave my name out of it." Rachel hugged her gently. "You're braver than most men in this town." The next day, the damage was visible. Someone had smashed the windows of the colored school. On the wall, painted in red, were the words, "Stay silent or stay buried." Parents pulled their children from class. Teachers refused to enter. The message was clear. Samuel and Rachel stood in front of the shattered building, looking at the broken glass like it was a battlefield. "They're not just silencing witnesses," Samuel said. "They're trying to erase the truth." Rachel held up Helen's handwritten statement. They failed. That night, in the back room of a small printing press, run by Reverend Hill's nephew, they made 50 copies of the letter, typed, anonymous, and damning. It read, "Thomas Bell was in the library from 9:00 to 11:15 the morning of the alleged incident. He never left. Multiple children saw him there. The accusation was manufactured. The punishment was murder. They slipped the letters into church bulletins, slid them into library books, left them under pews, inside hymnals, taped behind bathroom mirrors in the courthouse. The town buzzed. Some dismissed it. Negro lies, they said. Some read it in silence, lips pressed into thin lines. But some began to wonder. Because even in a town built on lies, the truth has a way of staining everything it touches. Later that week, Samuel found a note under his windshield. This ain't France. Stay in your place. No signature. Just a drawing of a rope. He brought it inside and laid it on the table without a word. Rachel stared at it for a long moment, then picked it up and dropped it in the fire. We keep going, she said. Samuel nodded. Outside, the wind picked up. The night was darker than usual. But inside their home, the fire burned steady. And in a town where voices were buried under robes and silence, theirs refused to fade. The courthouse sat like a monument to hypocrisy, white stone, tall columns, and an American flag waving proudly in front, as if justice lived inside. But Samuel knew better. It was Friday morning, 2 days before the so-called special hearing for Thomas Bell. The streets of Macon were humming with tension. It wasn't spoken, it was felt. Like heat before a thunderstorm, like a room full of people holding their breath. Samuel stood at the edge of the square, one hand gripping the envelope tucked inside his coat pocket. Inside, it was a cassette recording. The voice of Henry Duval, father of the girl who had accused Thomas. A white man, storekeeper, respected. And in the recording, slurred by drink but clear as daylight, he said, "My girl made it up. Hell, I told her to say it. Just needed to scare off them colored kids from hanging round the store. Didn't mean for it to go this far." Samuel had gotten it from a man who owed him a favor, a janitor at Duval's shop, who'd secretly recorded the confession. It was the kind of proof that could tear down the whole lie. The kind of truth the law was supposed to be built for. So he went to the courthouse, steps steady, eyes focused. Rachel walked beside him, holding his arm. Inside, the air was cold, dry, almost sterile. The clerk at the front desk gave him a look like he'd tracked mud into church. "I need to submit evidence for the Bell case," Samuel said, placing the envelope on the counter. The clerk blinked. "What is it?" "Audio evidence. Exonerating. Directly refutes the accusation." He nodded toward the label on the envelope. "You can hand it straight to Judge Crowley." The clerk took it reluctantly, then disappeared into the hallway. Samuel and Rachel waited. 10 minutes, then 20. Finally, the door reopened, not with the judge, not with a court officer, but with Sheriff Jennings. He was holding the envelope, still sealed. He didn't say a word, just looked at Samuel, and slowly, deliberately dropped it into the trash can beside the clerk's desk. Rachel stepped forward, furious. "That's tampering with evidence." Jennings gave her a lazy smile. "That's keeping the peace." Then he leaned close to Samuel and whispered, "You want to fight a war, soldier? Be careful where you dig your trenches." Samuel stared at the envelope. His breath caught somewhere between fury and fear. He wanted to scream, to strike, to rip that smugness off Jennings's face, but he didn't. Not here. Not yet. They left in silence. The day of the hearing, the courthouse was surrounded before noon, but it wasn't protesters. It was spectators. They came with picnic baskets, folded chairs. Some even brought their children. Like it was a festival. Like a life wasn't about to be snuffed out. Inside, there were no cameras, no press. Just a single judge, a sheriff, and a black boy in shackles. Thomas didn't cry. That's what broke Samuel most, how silent he was. As if the fear had swallowed his voice whole. As if he'd already made peace with the fact that no one was coming to save him. There was no defense attorney, no jury. Just Judge Crowley reading from a sheet of paper with all the passion of a grocery list. "The court finds the defendant guilty of criminal assault and hereby orders immediate state custody and transfer to a juvenile facility." Rachel stood up. "This is not a trial," she shouted. "This is theater. Where is the evidence? Where is the justice?" Crowley didn't even look at her. "Remove the woman." 2 bailiffs rushed toward her. Samuel stepped in between, raising his hands. "You'll have to take me too." The bailiffs hesitated. Jennings nodded. "Take them both." As they were led outside, Samuel turned to see Thomas one last time, eyes wide, face blank. A lamb being led, not to justice, but to slaughter. They weren't taken to jail, just dropped off at the edge of town. Jennings leaned out the window of the patrol car as they stood on the dirt road. "You should have stayed in France," he said. Here, we don't need heroes. The car kicked up dust as it drove off. Rachel looked at Samuel, tears streaking down her cheeks. They're going to kill that boy tonight. Samuel didn't argue. Because she was right. That evening the air was too still. Rachel couldn't sit still. She paced the living room, then the kitchen, then back again. Samuel sat on the porch watching the road. He heard it before he saw it. An old truck, tires crunching gravel. 2 men in the front. White robes shoved carelessly behind the seats, and in the truck bed, a rope. Samuel didn't move, just watched them drive past, heading toward the woods west of town. He knew the spot, near the old sawmill, the same place they found Levi Jenkins hanging 3 years ago. The town had called it suicide. Everyone knew better. Rachel came out, voice trembling. "We can't let them. We can't stop them," Samuel said. "Not tonight." She dropped to her knees beside him, burying her face in his chest. "Then what do? We remember," he said. "And we make sure they don't forget." That night, the town slept like it always did. And somewhere, in the woods just beyond where the church bells could reach, a fire burned, a rope swung, and Thomas Bell became a name no longer spoken in courtrooms, but whispered in prayers. The morning after Thomas Bell was lynched, the town went back to church. Women wore their Sunday hats. Men polished their shoes. Children rehearsed Bible verses in unison, while choirs filled the air with hymns about grace and salvation. And nobody said his name, not in prayer, not in song, not even in whispers. That silence was the most violent thing of all. But inside the small Carter home, the silence broke. Rachel sat at the kitchen table. The morning paper crumpled in her fist. The headline read, "Juvenile offender, transferred to state custody, no incidents reported." No incident. The blood was still drying under the sawmill floorboards. She slammed the paper down and grabbed a pen. Samuel didn't ask what she was doing. He just watched her like a man watching a match fall into dry grass. "I'm writing it all down," Rachel said through clenched teeth. "Every name, every word, everything they've buried." Samuel poured her a cup of coffee. "Who are you writing it for?" "For the people who still believe we're making it up," she snapped. "For the mothers who will bury their sons next. For Thomas." He sat across from her. Rachel began to write. They had no printing press, no newsroom, no legal protection, but they had the truth. And Rachel, with hands still trembling from grief, turned it into a weapon. She wrote it like testimony, like scripture. Each paragraph was a blow. Sheriff Jennings shaking hands with a man bearing a Klan ring. The forged accusation and withheld witness names. Helen's bandaged hand. The destroyed evidence recordings, affidavits, photos all suppressed or erased. And finally, the transfer that never happened. At the bottom, she added one line in red ink. Thomas Bell did not vanish. He was executed, and we watched it happen. She folded the document carefully and sealed it in a brown envelope, addressed in neat handwriting. The Chicago Defender Editorial Office, Negro Affairs Section, Chicago, Illinois. Samuel watched her write the address. "You sure about this?" he asked. Rachel didn't hesitate. If we stay quiet, they win twice. They had no way to mail it safely through Macon's post office. It would never make it. So they gave it to Charles, a friend of Samuel's who worked on the railroad freight line running north. "Slip it under the conductor's tray at the Atlanta stop," Samuel instructed. "He's one of ours." Charles nodded. "I'll guard it with my life." 1 week later, a package arrived in the mailbox at Mount Zion Baptist Church. Inside were 20 printed copies of The Defender. Page 3 carried a headline in bold black letters, "The Courtroom with a Rope: How Georgia Turned Justice into a Lynching Ground." Rachel stared at the words in silence. Below the headline was an illustration of Thomas Bell, not a photo, just a sketch, but it captured his innocence, the tilt of his head, the hollowness in his young eyes. Samuel turned the page. There it was, her entire letter, printed in full. They didn't change a word. Within days, the article spread like wildfire across black communities in the North. Churches read it aloud from pulpits. Barbershops stapled it to mirrors. Porters passed it between passengers on night trains heading west. And in Macon? People began to talk again, but this time they whispered Rachel's name. She wrote it. Some asked with awe. She put her name on it? Others said with fear. She lied, Jennings declared on the radio, his voice shaking with rage. She told the truth, said the people who mattered. Then came the letters, dozens. From Harlem, from Baltimore, from Detroit, typed, handwritten, some scribbled in pencil. They came addressed to Rachel Carter, Georgia truth writer. Some were filled with gratitude, some with grief, some with warnings, but a few came with promises. From a law student in Chicago, you are not alone. I'm compiling testimonies like yours for a national appeal. From a black newspaper editor in Street, Louis, we will reprint your words. Thomas Bell's name will not be buried. From a woman in Birmingham, they did this to my nephew. I thought nobody cared. Now I know someone does. Rachel cried the first night she read them. Then she got back to work. Sheriff Jennings retaliated fast. He called it slander, called Rachel a liar, a radical, a dangerous agitator. His deputies raided the Carter home under the excuse of missing court documents. They found nothing, but they left their mark. A broken chair, torn curtains, a bullet hole in the outhouse wall. Samuel nailed the door shut and carved a single word into the frame with his pocket knife, remember. The Carters knew they couldn't stay in Macon forever, but they hadn't finished what they started. On a Thursday afternoon, Rachel stood outside the courthouse, not with signs, not with a crowd, but with one copy of The Defender in her hand. She folded it into a frame and nailed it to the oak tree in the center of the square, the same tree where people once watched boys swing. Now it bore something else, a truth they couldn't ignore. People gathered. Some tore it down, others stared. One woman, older, white, left a single flower at the base. By nightfall, the tree was covered in candles and torn strips of cloth, each marked with a name. Not just Thomas, but Levi, Naomi, Curtis, Alice, Emmett, names whispered, names erased, names resurrected. Samuel stood beside Rachel. This isn't over, he said. No, she replied, it's just begun. It began with a knock. 3 soft taps on the Carters' front door just after dawn. Samuel reached for the shotgun behind the curtain, out of habit. Rachel opened it first. A teenage boy stood there barefoot, no older than Thomas had been. In his hand, a folded copy of The Defender, edges wrinkled, corners torn. One, read your story, the boy said, voice barely above a whisper. My brother. They said he stole a horse, but he never did. They hanged him outside of Monroe County last spring. Rachel opened the screen door slowly, eyes welling. What's your name, baby? Ezekiel, he said. Zeke, mostly. Samuel stepped onto the porch, and the boy looked at him, then back at Rachel. Can I help? Rachel blinked, surprised. Help? Tell people, Zeke said. Like y'all did. I can carry the story. I can take it where it needs to go. Samuel looked at the boy for a long time. Then he said the words that had been hanging in the air for months. We're not just telling a story anymore. We're building a record, one they can't burn. By spring, there were 12 volunteers, young black men and women, most under 25, from Macon, Atlanta, Selma, Jackson, even one from as far as Topeka. They came with worn suitcases, eager eyes, and stories of their own. Stories of fathers jailed without charges, brothers beaten in alleyways, mothers spit on in hospital waiting rooms. Rachel called them the keepers. They didn't carry weapons. They carried notebooks, pens, cameras when they could afford them. They sat in church basements and listened to grandmothers speak names. The census had forgotten. They knocked on doors where the truth had been buried under decades of silence. Every name they collected was written twice, once on paper and once on cloth. Strips of fabric, some white, some blue, some deep crimson, each marked with the name, the date, the place, and a single word remembered. The cloths were strung across fences, tied to lampposts, woven into quilts, wrapped around telephone poles, and slowly, a quiet revolution took shape. But Macon never forgot who started it, and neither did Sheriff Jennings. He stood on the courthouse steps one June afternoon, the sun casting hard shadows across his face. As he barked into a microphone, these agitators are not patriots. They're liars, poisoning our community with hate and fiction. And if the state won't stop them, we will. Behind him stood men in suits, judges, bankers, preachers, and just beyond them, parked in tight rows, were cars with out-of-state plates. Reporters had arrived. One raised a hand. "Sheriff, if they're lying, why haven't you sued?" Jennings hesitated. Another reporter spoke up. "What about the letter from Helen Morris?" She confirmed parts of the Carter's account. "She's unstable," Jennings barked. "Not credible." "But alive," the reporter pressed. "And not afraid anymore." The sheriff turned away, and the reporters kept writing. That night, someone threw a brick through the Carter's window. It wasn't a surprise. The note tied to it read, "Chicago can't save you." Samuel picked up the brick, turned it over in his hand, then placed it on the mantel next to Rachel's framed copy of The Defender. They didn't replace the glass. Instead, they left the hole open. "As a reminder, we don't need to be protected from the outside," Rachel said. "We need to be seen." Weeks later, on the anniversary of Thomas Bell's death, something strange happened. The courthouse lawn, once pristine and manicured, was flooded with people. Not protesters, not angry mobs, just people. Some brought candles, some brought flowers, but most brought names written on strips of cloth, pinned to their coats, tied around their wrists. Hundreds of names, the names the courts had erased, the names school books refused to print, the names whispered in kitchens and church pews and prison walls. Rachel stood in front of the crowd, a microphone crackling in her hand. "This is not a protest," she said. "This is a resurrection." Cheers broke out. A woman began to hum, lift every voice and sing. Others joined in, until the whole square trembled with sound. And then Rachel read aloud, "Thomas Bell, 14 years old, Macon, Georgia, accused without evidence, killed without justice, buried without name, but not forgotten. We are the ones who remember." Somewhere in the crowd, a woman recorded it on a handheld camera. A week later, the video went viral. The clip landed on the desk of a black congressman in Washington, then on the desk of a film producer in New York, then on the screen of a teenage girl in California who posted, "I never heard of Thomas Bell in school. Why not?" The question spread like fire, and with it came more stories, more letters, more names. The fire, once just a spark in a Georgia kitchen, had become a torch passed from hand to hand. Not a riot, not a revolution, a reckoning. That fall, the Carter house was quiet again. The volunteers had moved on to other towns. Rachel still wrote. Samuel had started speaking at churches. And on the porch, beside the brick from the broken window, sat a small wooden box. Inside it were 50 strips of cloth, each one handwritten, each one sacred. As the sun set, Rachel picked up a pen and stitched one more name into a fresh piece of cotton. Then she smiled, just a little, because somewhere, far beyond Macon, someone else would do the same. Not out of fear, not out of vengeance, but because real stories don't die when the law says they're over. They live when someone dares to speak them out loud. The bell may have rung for Thomas, but it echoed for us all. If this story made you feel something, anger, sorrow, or the urge to stand up, drop a number 1 in the comments to let us know you're still here, still paying attention, and still refusing to be silent. Because here's the truth. When justice fails one of us, it fails all of us. Thomas Bell's name was nearly erased, but because someone dared to speak, he became more than a headline, he became a legacy. The lesson? Your voice might be the only thing standing between silence and truth. Don't just watch, respond. Comment 1. If you believe stories like this must be told. Share this video so Thomas's name lives on.